taking the runway now, named Jersey Jerk, and we'll explain why when the aircraft returns to display. On the roll to get into the air and hold off while the Typhoon displays. If ever there were an aircraft that's an example of Anglo-American cooperation in military aviation, this aeroplane, the North American Mustang, is it. Because it was produced to meet a British requirement. Famously, a British purchasing commission in New York City was on the search for potential new American-built fighter designs for the Royal Air Force during 1940. One of the companies they visited was North American Aviation in Dallas, Texas. We had the idea that potentially North American, which was still quite a new company at that point, albeit already building the Harvard trainer, one of which we'll see later, in quantity for the RAF, could build the Curtiss P-40 Warhawk for the RAF under license. However, North American had other ideas, and it came up with a design it called the NA-73. Progress, that design, from initial conception to first flight before the end of 1940 wasn't quite as rapid advanced fighter in aerodynamic terms. The aircraft duly went through flight testing and was earmarked for operational service, and indeed entered service with both the US Army Air Forces and the RAF, known to the Americans as the P51, in fairly short order, also known as the A-36, as a ground attack and dive bomber platform to the Americans. All that was with the Allison B-1710 engine, which also exists most Curtiss P-40s. Very good engine for operations in the low-level role. But that was where Britain again really entered the story, because the then commanding officer of a unit based at Duxford called the Air Fighting Development Unit, which evaluated new aircraft and new capabilities for the RAF during wartime, Ian Campbell Ord, was talking to a friend of his, a man called Ronnie Harker, who was a service liaison test pilot for Rolls-Royce. A Mustang was duly converted with a Rolls-Royce built Merlin. It was test flown at the Rolls-Royce factory airfield at Hucknall. Immediately, the transformation was clear. Rolls-Royce couldn't fulfill the sort of demand that was required, though, to produce the Merlins for Mustang production on top of the tyres, mosquito bikes, and the like. So that's where Packard. The Allison-engine Mustangs, however, continued until very late in the war. Particularly the RAF flew them for low-level reconnaissance roles during the D-Day period. But it was the Merlin-powered versions, like the P51D that we see represented here, that were the great long-range escort fighters for the US 8th Air Force in the European theatre, and indeed for the US Army Air Forces out in the Pacific as well. This chief had other ideas. His crew chief being named Doc Watson, who was described later by Strait as a real tough kid, a leather worker from Boston. Strait put forward this idea of calling his Thunderbolt Jersey Bounce. Watson replied, "We can't do that. There's a guy in one of the other squadrons already named his airplane Jersey Bounce." And Strait didn't have a name on his fighter when he returned from his 5th mission. Watson said that his ground crew had come up with the name Jersey Jerk. Strait later recalled, "I said, Watson, I'm not a jerk. Why we want to name it that. Any guy that would take off in a single-engine airplane, cross the North Sea in the wintertime, and take a chance of getting his rear shot off by the Luftwaffe or by anti-aircraft fire has got to be a jerk." The name stuck, and Donald Strait, who had enlisted in his state's National Guard before joining up formally Air National Guard, is commemorated by this Australian-built Mustang of fighter aviation engineering.
And if you look away to your left-hand side as the Mustang is making its approach to land, you see that very curved fighter approach to the airfield. Well, if you imagine you're sat in the cockpit of a Mustang looking forward, you have very little forward visibility, especially when the aircraft comes into landing attitude and the nose gets higher and higher, like driving with your bonnet up. So many of these fighters make what we call the curved fighter approach, which is staying very tight to the runway, turning very tightly towards it, so you can at least keep sight of the runway for as long as possible, in this case out to the left-hand side of the canopy, and then kicking the aircraft straight at the last minute, looking left and right, hoping to see the edges of the runway, and then all should be well. And also, if you're down the front of the crowd line, you may well see this in the next few minutes. Taxiing is even harder, because you can see from this aircraft now, there is no forward visibility, so these fighters, Spitfires, come very much follow this kind of speed. You'll see when this aircraft taxis past, it is absolutely gorgeous. Imported to the UK with the assistance of the late Richard Grace and his team at Air Leasing and Sitewell, and is operated by ultimate Warbird flights to Sitewell on passenger rides, as well as being based part of the time at Duxton, where the Mustang base of course. And it was Mark Levy flying the Mustang today, and listening before the show, you might have heard our colleague Jonathan talking to Mark about aerobatic Warbird pilot in the grid display from Mark there in the So, just looking ahead to what we have planned for you in the next hour or so. Next display item should be the vintage pair, 2 Chipmunks. And as we head towards about 10 to 2, we're going to have a very special appearance by the F-35B from the Royal Air Force, the Lightning II. We then have another short but sweet overseas contribution in the form of the MRTT, the multi-role tanker transport, followed on by, again, one of the highlights certainly for me today, which will be the Dutch Spitfire. And then as we get towards 2:30, again from our friends overseas, the Polish F-16 in the extra 330. And then as we head towards 3 o'clock, we'll go back to that very famous wartime trainer, the Harvard. But if you do look to your left-hand side, you can see a helicopter approaching. I think that has some very important cargo, the type of cargo that can get in